Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. What if I told you that a single meta-analysis from 2016 pretty much wiped out a massive chunk of natural bodybuilding myths overnight? Yeah, a lot of lifters are out there thinking natural muscle gain is all about finding one magic trick, right? You know the ones. You gotta train heavy only, or hit absolute failure on every single set, or maybe they're chasing that one special split the pros use. We get bombarded with this stuff constantly online, but the research, it keeps pointing somewhere else entirely. Today, we're clearing the noise.
So that 2016 study I mentioned, researcher Brad Schoenfeld and his team basically dropped a bomb on bro science. They found a clear dose-response relationship between your weekly training volume and muscle growth. In plain English, more hard sets generally meant more hypertrophy, period. This one finding just completely obliterates so much internet hype right out of the gate. It tells us, hey, effort absolutely matters, but accumulating that effort over the course of a week, that's what actually forces your body to adapt and grow.
Because here's the reality check. Muscle gain isn't about some secret gimmick or the perfect split. It relies on mastering a few, honestly kind of boring, but incredibly powerful variables. We're talking enough weekly volume, sufficient effort, smart exercise selection, recoverable fatigue, and hitting your protein. If you get those dialed in, you simply don't need the gimmicks. The issue usually isn't that people aren't working hard in the gym. It's that they're busting their butts chasing the completely wrong variables. So here's our roadmap for dismantling these myths today. First, we'll establish the natural muscle truth. Second, we'll tackle the myth that tiny volume works. Third, the whole always hit failure debate. Fourth, we'll look at the myths around load and frequency. And finally, number 5, we'll break down the real growth drivers.
All right, part 1, the natural muscle truth. When you're training naturally, your absolute ceiling is dictated by your biological recovery. You can't just outmuscle biology by endlessly ramping up the intensity, or by completely destroying a muscle group every time you lift. Instead, you're trying to create a repeatable stimulus, something your body can actually adapt to week in and week out. As researchers like Helms and Knuckles have pointed out in their reviews, the absolute best program is simply the one that gets you doing hard progressive work while staying entirely recoverable. You don't grow by crawling out of the gym destroyed. You only grow from the workouts you can actually recover from.
Moving on to part 2, myth. Tiny volume works.
So there's this really widespread myth out there that natural lifters need to keep their volume super low or else they'll overtrain. But if we look at the meta-analyses from Krieger and Schoenfeld, they prove that doing multiple sets unequivocally beats single sets when you want to maximize growth. As long as you're managing your recovery, getting in more weekly hard sets is basically the primary driver for greater hypertrophy.
Let's actually look at what this means in practice. Going in and doing just a single hard set of chest on a Monday, what we might call a token workout, that's a very small stimulus. It really doesn't compare to accumulating, say, 8 to 12 quality sets spread across your whole week. Think about hitting a solid 4 sets of 8 on the bench press at 80 kilos, and then coming back a few days later to do incline presses or cable flies. That delivers a way higher, far more robust growth signal than just doing the bare minimum and heading to the locker room.
Which brings us to part 3, the myth that you must always hit failure.
Oh man, this is a big one. The myth claims that if you stop even 1 rep short of absolute failure, you're just leaving gains on the table. It assumes every single set needs to be an absolute red-in-the-face grinder. But the evidence? It's a lot more nuanced. Data from Morton and Schoenfeld shows that as long as your effort is high enough, meaning you're generating good tension and keeping your reps in reserve in a smart range, taking every set to complete muscle failure is not uniquely required. Actually, scratch that. It can even backfire by cooking your central nervous system and generating way too much systemic fatigue.
Just think about the practical application here. Failure is incredibly exercise dependent. If you're on the leg extension machine doing isolation work, sure, going to failure or very close to it is practical and totally safe. You kind of need it there to recruit those stubborn, high-threshold muscle fibers. But what about heavy barbell squats or a heavy bench press? Failing on those costs a massive amount of fatigue, it completely ruins the rest of your workout, and honestly, you might just get stuck under the bar. So overall, the real hypertrophy benefit comes from doing hard sets near failure, not treating failure itself as some mandatory rule.
All right, part 4, let's tackle the myths around load and frequency. First, let's talk about the weight on the bar. There is this incredibly stubborn idea that you exclusively need heavy, low-rep barbell work to grow. But the literature just does not back that up. Research from Morton in 2016 and Schoenfeld in 2017 makes it super clear that a really broad range of loads, we're talking anywhere from 30 to 80% of your 1-rep max, can produce similar hypertrophy. A 20-rep set with a much lighter weight might burn like absolutely crazy, but it creates genuine mechanical tension and muscle growth, as long as you're pushing it close to failure.
And here is a sample upper body week, showing exactly how you can blend these concepts. You do not have to go maximal on every single lift. You can use the bench press in that 5 to 8 rep range for some highly efficient heavy work. Then, later, shift over to the incline dumbbell press for moderate load volume. Finally, wrap it up with cable flies and lateral raises in the 12 to 20 rep range for some really joint-friendly tension. This setup lets you accumulate tons of high-quality, recoverable work without completely wrecking your joints in the process. Now, what about how often you train? We've all heard the classic bro split myth, right? The idea that a muscle only grows if you absolutely annihilate it once a week. Then on the flip side, some people will tell you that training a muscle 3 times a week is a magic growth switch. Well, evidence from Ralston and colleagues shows that frequency is really just a fatigue management tool. The split itself isn't the magic driver of growth. It's simply a strategy to make sure your later sets don't turn into total garbage reps.
To help visualize this, just imagine trying to do 16 sets of chest in one massive marathon session. I mean, by set 12, your performance is going to drop off a cliff, right? But what if you execute 8 high-quality sets on Monday and then another 8 high-quality sets on Thursday? Suddenly, your performance stays high across the entire week. Splitting that volume into 2 days just means better reps. And when we're talking about natural hypertrophy, better reps will usually beat worse reps every time.
And finally, part 5, the real growth drivers.
Okay, we need to bust a really persistent myth here. The idea that those transient post-workout hormone spikes are the ultimate signal for growth. People buy all kinds of crazy supplements chasing this. But as Morton's 2016 data proved, transient testosterone and growth hormone spikes immediately after training do not determine muscle growth in trained lifters, period. So forget trying to perfectly optimize these tiny little hormonal windows. The real story of natural muscle growth is all about sustainable, repeatable tension backed up by proper recovery. And speaking of recovery, if there's one nutritional variable that consistently moves the needle, it's your protein intake. Based on Morton's 2018 data, the magic number to aim for is 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. So, to put that into perspective, if you weigh 80 kilograms, you're aiming for roughly 128 grams of protein daily to support your body's adaptation. You definitely don't need to stress over getting it perfect down to the exact decimal point, but you absolutely have to get enough total intake, along with enough sleep and calories, to actually make all that hard training work. So, let's bring this all together. The big lesson here is pretty straightforward. Natural hypertrophy really isn't all that mysterious. If you want the shortest, most evidence-based summary from this entire explainer, it's this. Volume matters most. It's your main driver. Effort matters, for sure, but failure is a situational tool, not a strict rule. Your load ranges are totally flexible, so use both heavy and light work. Use training frequency simply to manage your fatigue and keep performance high. And finally, protein and recovery matter way more than any internet hype. Master this, and you have a system you can actually execute week after week.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Are you going to keep spinning your wheels chasing exhausting internet gimmicks? Or are you ready to finally apply the boring but incredibly powerful science of a repeatable stimulus? Take a hard, honest look at your current program today. Ditch the myths about grinding single sets to failure, embrace the reality of volume and recovery, and remember to apply science to your training with NattyCore. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.